first from John, I'm sure, and then questions. Please.
Thank you very much, Martin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I spent 3 days in Somalia last week. I've just returned. I went to Mogadishu and also to Baidoa. We all recall very well that in 2011 we had a global tragedy where 260,000 people died of famine in Somalia. So as humanitarians, we have been working very hard to help the people recover in circumstances which are extremely difficult. The climate, as you know, is very harsh, and the security environment equally so. There's approximately 1 million people still internally displaced inside Somalia, and another 1 million Somalis are refugees in the neighbouring countries. Since 2011, we have seen a stabilization of the humanitarian situation, but it is extremely fragile. We've seen the latest assessment done by the Food Security Unit, which now tells us that this year, right now, there are 857,000 Somalis inside Somalia in crisis and emergency conditions. In terms of food insecurity. That's a modest improvement on the last figure for the previous 6 months, which was 870,000. There are approximately 2 million Somalis who are considered to be food insecure. So, these figures are very, very large. They tell us a simple message, which is that the situation in Somalia for Somalis on the humanitarian side is very grave. It's also very fragile. And we have to work much harder to bring people into a place where they will be food secure, firstly, and also hoping that the security conditions will improve to allow people to return to their homes and rebuild their lives. And with 2 million Somalis either displaced internally or as refugees, that's also a huge number. I met with the newly appointed government when I was in Mogadishu, specifically with the Foreign Minister and with the Minister of Interior. I was quite impressed. I've been going to Somalia now a number of times over the last 3 years, and I must say that the level of dialogue, the conversation of responsibility to put the people at the centre of attention coming from this new government was quite striking, and an embracing of the real challenges that any government in Somalia faces. First and foremost, it's around corruption, and then it's tackling the security, the insecurity. When I was there, we had a grim reminder of how difficult and dangerous it is for everybody in Mogadishu, not least our humanitarian colleagues who are incredibly courageous. If you recall, on the 19th of June last year, our UN compound was attacked by Al-Shabaab. And when I was there last week, on the 13th, we had this car bomb, which was attacking a UNHCR vehicle convoy. Miraculously, we did not have any injuries to our colleagues, except obviously the shock of being caught up in such an incredibly dangerous incident. But the mitigating measures that our UNDSS staff have put in place to ensure that our colleagues are as protected as they can be, and they were in these hardened vehicles which served their purpose. I should also tell you that when I went to Baidoa, I did see a change in the landscape there. That was my first time going to Baidoa in the 3 years that I've gone to Somalia, which does reflect in the landscape in terms of who's controlling where. You have a number of UN agencies now, OCHA, UNICEF, WHO, who have permanent UN staff now based and working out of Baidoa again, and quite a strong non-governmental NGO community doing a lot of very important work as the access to the population improves for us on the humanitarian side. The final point that I'd like to just raise by way of introductory comments before taking questions is the whole question of funding. I mean, this is another of our very large-scale humanitarian operations, and we are really challenged with this whole global proliferation of large-scale crises. Somalis have suffered endlessly for almost 25 years. We cannot be distracted now from our task to stay with them, to help to consolidate these fragile gains that have already been made, to continue to support them, to build back resilience, to be able to cope with future shocks. And this requires funding. Now, we've seen a trend in the funding over the last couple of years, where in 2011 our appeal was 86% funded. At that point, Somalia was the center of global attention. In 2012, that went down to 52%, and last year down to 50%. Right now, we only have 4%. Now, this, of course, is February. It's an early part of the year, but that's very ominous, and that's one of the key reasons that I went to Somalia, to see what exactly is the impact on the ground, and what is it that we need to be focusing on, and also to come back here and raise awareness on the whole funding side. We know that our generous donors have, as I say, a whole proliferation of appeals before them, and we make no apology for communicating the needs of the people on the ground. But at the same time, we have to keep now very focused on all of the crises that are out there, not just those that may be in the center of current media attention. And for Somalia, it does come down to the funding, and right now we are very worried about the prospects for funding what again is a large appeal of some $933 million, of which we have only so far to date this year received $36 million. So we will make that appeal to our donor community to really not allow our activities to fall off at this critical moment, and that we then fall back into the situation that we were in 2011. The numbers speak for themselves. I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, John. Yes, please, Pamela.
Good morning, Mr. Ging, and welcome back. On behalf of the UN Correspondents Association, I'm Pamela Falk from CBS News. You mentioned the Al-Shabaab attack of last year. There was a UN monitoring group report that talked about Al-Shabaab, the experts report. How significant are the Al-Shabaab attacks in terms of your ability to deliver aid? And just a quick follow-up on your funding point, are there countries that have dropped off in terms of the funding or have made commitments that haven't followed through? Thank you.
Thank you. On the latter, I must say that the donor base has been very solid. It's just that the amounts coming through have gone down. So we're pleased about that. Pleased about the fact that we're retaining the donor base and the donor support for Somalia, but the amount of money that they're able to mobilize for Somalia with the other demands that are on them has fallen off. And this is why, again, we have to have I think at the global level, we have to have a new conversation about about the fact that the needs are continuing to grow, and therefore there have to be larger allocations for humanitarian action. It cannot be funded from the same pot of money, and that's what we're finding in too many instances. On the question of insecurity, absolutely insecurity affects our capacity to do our job. First and foremost, I have to commend my humanitarian colleagues because they are risking their lives every day. And last Thursday was another example of a routine humanitarian convoy being attacked by a car bomb. This is sadly, the unpredictability of the security situation. On one hand, you don't know when you're going to be attacked, but then on the other hand, it's also sadly the fact that they are vicious attacks. They are large scale attacks. So we have to mitigate those risks in the best way that is possible, but also continue to do the work that needs to be done. However, we are constrained. Our physical presence in many locations is impossible from an international staff point of view, because it's not possible to mitigate the risks. But in those places, our national partners are present and working as in partnership and under our general direction and with our support. But for sure, our access constrains our capacity to deliver on the scale that we need to deliver. And that's also part of the reason why this continues to be protracted as well. You just can't get on the scale that you need to on all the places where it's needed. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to Showen next. Excuse me.
Thanks, Martin. Mr. Ging, thanks for the briefing. What's your understanding of what areas Al-Shabaab controls in Somalia? Because we've, over the years, talked about the improvement of AMISOM forces taking control, pushing them out. What do they control, and how does that impede the work of your agencies?
As you rightly point out, the areas of control fluctuate, but they are generally in the areas where they're most present and they have most control are in the south and south central. There have been gains by the AMISOM troops. My being able to go to Baidoa is evidence of that. Last time I was there, I was not able to go to Baidoa because it was not secure. And more of the urban areas in the south are more and more secure for example, enabling us to be full-time present in these locations. But it's still quite a sizable area that the Al-Shabaab do control, and that's what prohibits our access, particularly in much of the rural area of the south.
Okay, I'm coming next to Edie, and then it'll be Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Mr. Ging. A couple of questions on exactly why these 857,000 odd people in the country are still in crisis because of a lack of food. Is it because they're in rural areas? Is it because they're in insecure Al-Shabaab areas? Is it a combination of both that nobody, including national NGOs, can get in there? And recalling back to 2011, that was a height of Al-Shabaab. Is the insecurity actually to blame for that huge death toll of way over 200,000?
Again, the 857,000 that we are assessing as being in food insecurity to the level of emergency and crisis, these are predominantly in those rural areas that you mentioned. They're very hard to access. They're also dependent on the agriculture for their livelihood. They're also the displaced in Mogadishu and elsewhere, where they've had to flee their homes to get assistance because we're not able to access them where they are living. And the conflict and the whole collapse of economic infrastructure leaves people impoverished. I mean, that's a direct consequence of the insecurity of the conflict. People are impoverished, and there's no economy per se to enable people to get out of that impoverishment. And that's why it's all interlinked. There has to be a restoration of security where the economy can be rebuilt, and then lives and livelihoods beyond just subsistence agriculture will be allowed to prevail. And yes, if you recall back in 2011, one of the reasons that it was so devastating and so many people died is because of the insecurity, could not get the aid to many of the places that people needed to be helped, and they were physically, so weak that actually getting out to where the aid was available was sometimes a struggle that they couldn't rise to. I mean, that was really a horrific situation. And again, that's why we need to keep our attention on Somalia. It's incredibly fragile, and we do not want a repeat of what happened in 2011.
Mr. Abadi, and then followed by Masood.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Mr. King, for this briefing. I was glad to hear that you did not think that the problems of Somalia, including piracy, insecurity, violence, humanitarian crisis, and no economy, date back from 3 years ago since you have known this country. They do date from the time of Muhammad Adib, Farah Adib, 25 years ago, as you know. And these problems in the country due basically to the lack of political foundations, namely the building of political democratic institutions in the country. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, that the core of Somalia's problems today and for the last 25 years have been conflict and an incapacity of Somali leadership to provide the governance that the people deserve. That's why I was struck by the honesty of the conversation that I had in Mogadishu this time with politicians who were embracing their responsibility to put the interest of the people first. I'm always humbled every time I go to Somalia to see how, in such appalling and uncivilized circumstances, people remain very civilized in their values. I'm talking about the ordinary people. But they're weary. They are weary of decades of impoverishment, of conflict, of despair, of hopelessness. The impact on things like education, again, phenomenally destructive in terms of the economic prospects for whole generations. That is again another example of why we need to focus and put children at the center in the first instance, and then the ordinary people at the center of decision making. I hope with the New Deal there's a big commitment there from the broader international community around all of this effort to bring about stability, stabilization on governance, economic regeneration, and so forth. It's a big challenge, therefore it needs a big response. There was a lot of enthusiasm and mobilization of funding last year on that new deal, but now it has to turn into reality, and it's hard work, and it's not been easy since that was launched last year. In fact, even the political dynamic has not continued in the way that they hoped at that time. That's why we now have a new government. But again, we can't give up. I mean, this is the Somali people deserve that we don't give up, however enormous the challenge might be. And then for people like myself, I can tell you that, being there, I do see a basis for progress. If we keep putting the interests of the people at the center of our focus, of our attention, and build on that, because they are capable of rebuilding this country. They want to rebuild this country, and they need our support to do that. Thank you.
Masood, and then Matthew.
Thank you. Mr. King, Given the wariness, as you had said, about the international community to fund the Somali aid effort, and you are trying your best to convince the international community to come up with the money, but do you think, do you see any palpable changes within the Somali society where they are willing to accept certain conditions being imposed by the international community to where the aid can come in? Have you been trying to do that to convince both the donors and the Somali people?
No, absolutely. I think we all have to embrace our own responsibility. So, in dialogue with Somalis, they also have to embrace their responsibility vis-a-vis the international aid effort, for sure. First and foremost, the whole question of corruption and tackling that effectively. But the other side of that coin is the international community embracing its responsibility to the Somali people, and we failed the Somali people many times down through these last 2.5 decades. And the most recent failure was in 2011 when we saw a crisis developing, but we didn't mobilize a response to prevent that crisis. And then, really very frustratingly for many humanitarians is that the cost of then dealing with that crisis that could be prevented is more expensive than preventing it. You have a child in therapeutic feeding. It's much more expensive to help that child to recover than it is to prevent that child from falling into such a malnourished state that they need therapeutic feeding. We shouldn't bring this just down to dollars and cents, because that's not how we value human life. But there is a financial dimension to all of this, which is that by investing in prevention, by investing in resilience, by helping people before they collapse, it is actually more cost efficient, as well as saving the lives. And we humanitarians would say the first thing we should be preoccupied with is saving lives and reducing humanitarian suffering. But also for the limited funding that's available globally, we should make sure that we're using it in the most efficient and the most effective way.
So you believe, just to follow up, so you believe that you're optimistic about the Somali society being on the right footing to change?
I am hopeful, as all Somalis are, that positive change lies ahead. I'm telling you, in the data that we have, it's a very, very slow and modest progress. It's extremely fragile, but we need to continue to be resolved, to stay the course, and help the people of Somalia to finally get out of this situation that they've been trapped in for far, far too long. And yes, it can be done. It can be done. And the great strength here, the reason that we should have confidence that it can be done, is in the strength of the communities. When you go out and you meet with the people in the communities and how they are surviving and struggling to survive, and their resolve, their determination, and their vision for their own future. In the end, Somali problems will be solved by Somalis who will have a Somali solution for that. We in the international community, we will support them. That's our role.
Matthew and then Joseph.
Great. Thanks a lot. On behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access, thanks for doing these briefings when you get back from trips. I wanted to ask about remittances. Seems like that's part of the Somalis helping Somalis, and there seems to have been Barclays was going to cut off the remittances. There was a court case. What's the UN system doing to try to either impact or ensure that the diaspora can continue to send money back? And also on Somaliland, I know that you didn't go there on this trip, but there's been an ongoing issue about the humanitarian air service and the airspace over Somaliland and whether the UN can fly things in. And what's the UN's role in deciding sort of who will govern the airspace and how does it impact the humanitarian?
Thanks. On the remittances, absolutely. We are encouraging that all of the infrastructure that is needed to facilitate those what are absolutely indispensable remittances from the diaspora to be able to flow through to the people continue. I mean, we don't have obviously the authority or the capacity to decide on these issues, but we are on behalf of the Somali people who are so dependent on that infrastructure, we are advocating and seeking to use our influence and assist in any way that might be helpful or useful in that conversation, in that dialogue. Because again, it is so fragile and so essential, and there's so much dependence on those remittances. On the Somaliland dynamic, and within the politics of Somalia, the whole question of airspace. That didn't come to my attention on this trip, but on my last trip, there was an agreement brokered in Turkey that found a solution to allow the functioning of the airspace throughout Somalia in a way that then enabled us to continue with our UNHAS flights. It didn't come up in this particular mission. Last time I was there 6 months ago, there was an issue about UNHAS not being able to fly for some days, which during the term of my mission was actually resolved, and the flights went ahead, and the humanitarian coordinator himself took an UNHAS flight to Hargeisa in Somaliland.
Okay, Joseph.
Yes, and thank you for this briefing. Joseph Klein, Canada Free Press. The question is, you had focused in your remarks on food, and of course the critical food security issues. I'm wondering if you could comment on issues involving health, and whether there's been any improvement that you've seen with regard to hospitals, doctors, vaccinations for children, or whether the security issues you alluded to are still hampering the health situation.
And thank you for raising that, because as you recall, in August last year, MSF, due to the insecurity, for the first time had to close in 22 years their health services in the south, and that resulted in the closure of over 20 health services at that time, and that has had a significant and negative impact on not just healthcare generally, but also the nutritional programs for malnourished children, which were also operating through those centres as well. Now, we've been struggling as a community to cope with that loss. I mean, MSF's reach and their impact was very significant. Other humanitarian organizations have been scaling up to try to meet some of those needs. But one of the conclusions of my mission is that we are not there. We're not there yet. So the level of health coverage is significantly less now than it was in August before the MSF withdrawal, and we have not been able to compensate as yet for that withdrawal. And all of our health partners are working very hard to try to fill that gap. But as yet, and again, due to the absence of funding, because again, this early part of the year has been so appallingly poor on the funding side, they haven't been able to, engage in the setup costs. The new organisations, the new partners who would take over from MSF on the scale that they have been needed. And this of course is a huge issue. We're also, as humanitarians, very preoccupied with the water and sanitation in the different IDP sites. And again, this is an ongoing and quite expensive operation in all of these sites. And as I mentioned to you, when you're delivering water and sanitation for over 1 million internally displaced, that's a lot of that's a lot of cost. And again, the funding in those areas, when it doesn't come through, means that there's a break in those services. So again, we will be highlighting this as an immediate and also a serious impact on the health of the communities who depend on these services.
Any other questions? Yes, Errol.
Thanks, Martin. I just wanted to clarify a little bit on this. When you said we need to keep our focus on Somalia, it is increasingly fragile if we don't like to repeat the mistakes of the 2011. Bearing in mind, actually, that you mentioned all these deficit of the funds, and also bearing in mind that there are 3 major developing crises, Central African and South Sudan, and even on the other part of the world. And we've heard Madam Amos at the end of the year saying that UN humanitarian funds and work is actually stretched down by these 4 major crises. Please clarify a little bit more.
Well, this is what we have to resolve with our donor community. The fact of the matter is that in 2014 we have significantly higher and more expensive humanitarian needs across the globe. We have new additional crises which are large scale, and we also have the continuation of many, if not most of, last year's crises on similar scale, due to principally the effects of climate or conflict, and this is something that is not sustainable in terms of effective humanitarian action from the same pot of money. It's now the reality is that our donor community are also having limited financial means to meet all of these demands that are being placed on them. But the question is then, what are we going to do? How are the decisions going to be made? Because the consequence of underfunding is people lose their lives. They die. Every year, hundreds of thousands of children die under the age of 5 in the Sahel. Every year. Because we haven't got the resources, the funding, to actually save their lives with basic food. And then other vaccines and all of just the very basic life-saving. Now, again, the global allocation of funding is too small. It has been too small for quite a number of years. And the gap is getting wider and wider year after year. But the global allocation to humanitarian action is a modest component of the international financing or the international financial commitment that member states have to global action. So what we humanitarians want to see is we want to see a debate and a discussion around the totality of international financial means that are available out there, and to talk then about the allocation that is being made to the humanitarian component. Because, again, our component of international engagement is the life-saving component. And not having enough money, which now runs into billions of shortfall every year, is resulting in millions dying needlessly or suffering needlessly, simply because the allocation of life-saving assistance is not available.
So time for 2 last questions. Nick and then Nizar.
Mr. Ging, Nick Bryant, BBC News. Do you feel you're swimming against a riptide here?
Yeah.
The first thing you hear British people say in the midst of all the floods is that we shouldn't be sending so much money abroad to fund humanitarian aid. We should be spending it at home. You hear similar arguments in Australia or elsewhere in the world. Is that part of the problem at the moment, that politically, as well as economically, it's very difficult to make that argument that there needs to be more humanitarian aid?
Yes, we are. We're swimming against the tide, and we're losing the battle on behalf of people, children, and the vulnerable, who then lose their lives because we lose this this battle or this argument or this fight for resources, but at the end of the day, many of us believe that the resources are there. It's how they're allocated. We're not expecting, that you can extract from people across the planet in more taxation endlessly. But what we do feel very strongly about, particularly when you stand in places where you see the impact of very, very modest assistance, life-saving, is that surely as a global community, with the wealth that exists in this world, with the amount that is spent internationally on international activities, whatever they might be, surely we can allocate more for humanitarian action when it so directly results in the saving of lives. Now that debate has not occurred. That's why we're losing the argument. We're losing the endeavor to actually raise more money. We're just boxed into this limited pot of money, more or less. Yes, it does increase somewhat. The United Kingdom, for example, is one of the countries that has lived up to its commitment under the percentage of GDP which is assigned for international aid and development, and we applaud, of course, very much the British taxpayer on that. But the fact of the matter is that in the end, the needs are now outstripping the means so significantly that we have to have a new debate on this. We really do, and put people again at the centre of that debate, and put the entire pot of financial resources that taxpayers are contributing to global action, whatever that action might be, from military action right across the spectrum to humanitarian action, and calculate on the basis of the most impact and value for money where the funding should go, and don't have an equation where there's a predefined allocation for humanitarian action more or less similar every year, when the reality is the humanitarian needs are not more or less similar any year, sadly, because of the way the world is and has been in this last period. They're actually growing quite dramatically year after year after year.
Yeah,
the last
hi,
question.
Mr. Ging. You answered part of my question, in fact, regarding the debate about taxing the wealthy. Recently, we saw the report about 85 people possessing over $1 trillion alone, more than half of the world population's poor people's wealth all put together. Is it time to tax, for example, foreign exchange, as the French suggested earlier? Do you think that it is time to debate such thing?
Yeah, I don't have the actual detailed solution to this. I'm a humanitarian who's trying to do what we can do with what we're given. But what I'm saying is that there needs to be a debate on how more money can be allotted for life saving when the consequences are a matter of life and death for those who fall into the category of those that we cannot help. We know where they are. We have the means and the ability to get to them, and the only thing that we are falling short on is resources. We do believe, as humanitarians, that there are sufficient resources on this planet to be able to save the lives of innocent children and those who are dependent on humanitarian assistance. We do believe that. We firmly believe it, but it's not being mobilized to enable us to do what we can do and what we need to do and what we're obliged to do.
Do you think that the United Nations is addressing that or can address that?
Yes, the United Nations has to address that. That's one of our responsibilities. Certainly, as the humanitarian arm of the United Nations, we are actively involved in seeking to raise the funding. But we have to acknowledge that in the debate so far, we have not succeeded to have the breakthrough of the funding stream to keep pace with the humanitarian needs, which continue to grow. I mean, the people who are in humanitarian need did not create their humanitarian need. It's circumstances beyond their control, either the natural disasters or conflict for the most part. So they're truly, the victims of a circumstance which causes them then to depend on global solidarity, which mobilizes a modest effort, but a life-saving effort, which they need and which we do firmly believe they deserve. And again, unfortunately, as of now, the gap between what we can mobilize and what the needs are is very wide. And that means in that gap, people are dying needlessly and suffering needlessly as well.
Thank you very much, John, for your usual thorough and also sobering briefing. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Today, the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Navi Pillay, welcomed the report of the Independent UN Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which was published in Geneva yesterday. She said that its findings need to be treated with the greatest urgency, as they suggest that crimes against humanity of an unimaginable scale continue to be committed in the DPRK. Ms. Pillay said that in January 2013, she urged the international community to put much more effort into tackling the human rights situation of the people in the DPRK. 2 months later, the Commission of Inquiry was established by the Human Rights Council. She said that the Commission has now published an historic report which sheds light on violations of a terrifying scale, the gravity and nature of which, in the report's own words, do not have any parallel in the contemporary world. She added that there can no longer be any excuses for inaction. The High Commissioner said that insufficient attention was being paid to the kind of horrific and sustained human rights